So the key to the philosopher becomes the question that you ask. The questions that philosophers ask. And so one of the things we should talk about is what were the questions that Thoreau was asking us to consider. So what for Thoreau is love? What for Thoreau was truth? What for Thoreau was justice? Like trying to define those higher forms that Plato sort of set out in his Republic way back in Greek history. So when we think about Thoreau, I posted some questions for us to consider today. Like some I think are very relevant to now. Like what would Thoreau think of Instagram or Twitter? What would he think of the government shutdown? What would he think of the proposal to build a border wall? Is he right that a person is not bound by an unjust government? That's one of the key arguments that he makes, right? Is what is justice? And if it's unjust, should I have to follow it? Why does he think, or why do you think that transcendentalism, his philosophy, is sort of an expression of American democracy? People argue that Thoreau and Emerson and other American writers are American philosophers, that they're the first people that really express an American idea. So do you agree with that? And then, like, what quote from Walden do you think is the essential quote? I think those are all really key and important things to consider. So I've given you lots of questions to think about. Hopefully we'll have a good Harkness discussion. I'll try to stop you partway through, give you some feedback, but let's see what you think about this.
Basically suggesting that we're kind of following this blind reality, that we're just doing what people are telling us to do, what our elders are telling us, and we're not really opening our eyes to see the true reality. And I think that's what he was referring to, because he was against slavery, he was against the Mexican War. And I think he was kind of saying that about in America, our like soldiers and our citizens are just following this idea that we're the best, and that everyone else is we're superior. So he's just saying that like all the Americans were following this, I guess, status quo, that we need to like fight, we need to gain as much territory as possible, that white people are superior and we need to have slavery. And he kind of opened his eyes and saw that no, this was wrong, and like that we shouldn't do those things.
Yeah, I agree with you, because in the one quote he says, "But only that day dawns to which we are awake, there is more day to dawn. The sun is but a morning star." There he's like trying to teach us that there's a lot more to see in this world and learn compared to like what we are seeing now and what we have been taught, and that like we should be like self-reliant. We're able like to see like more on if we're as an individual.
I really love that quote that you said, and like the day dawns when we are awake. And one of the questions that Mr. Hews sent out about if Thoreau would like Instagram. And I feel like when I'm scrolling through social media and things like that, am I really awake? Am I aware of what I'm looking at? Or am I kind of just numb to it? And I feel like that's a big part of how I don't think Thoreau would like Instagram or Twitter. I feel like it's, again, a distraction, from the real world. And when we're doing this, and when we're spending time on social media and platforms like that, are we really awake, or are we just watching other people do things and trying to live vicariously through others when we could be out there making a difference ourselves?
I agree with you, but at the same time, I have to be like, I think he likes it and he dislikes it. Like, he likes it because like he thinks like everyone like should be able to like freely express their emotions, their opinion, which you can do through like Instagram and Twitter and social media. But he might also think that like it's like focusing like people's opinions on like certain things that aren't like that important, and like it's also materialistic, which he doesn't like, and like it brings on prejudices on like people who use social media, and like it makes them like feel like they're superior, when he thinks that we should be everyone has an equal chance to everything, no matter the social status.
Yeah. I mean, and that almost saw him, like, he definitely would have, like, Instagram and Twitter in some sort of way as, like, a way to spread, like, his social injustice and the different philosophies that he had.
Well, yeah, you could do that with it, but I feel like in most cases, we're kind of just blindly scrolling through our phone. We're not really being mindful of what's going on around us in real life. We're kind of living through, as Dev said, we're kind of living through other people's lives. We're kind of like idolizing them. We're not living our lives for ourselves.
I agree with you, Sean. I think he would also like like the part of it where people sort of like put a different version of themselves on social media, so you don't even really see the actual person. You just see what they want you to see. And I personally think that he wouldn't even like cell phones. Like he would be the guy that carries around a flip phone just because he has to, because he doesn't want to get sucked into that device. It sort of like almost brainwashes some people.
I think specifically, like maybe Instagram you might dislike, but Twitter, it gives you like, it's less pictures and more of how you feel, and you can say what you think. I think you would like the idea behind that, maybe not how people use it.
I agree, but I do feel like social media itself contradicts his beliefs, because he believes that like we should transcend and be the best we can be, and we should have self-reliance and rely on ourselves to do what we believe in and make decisions for ourselves. But as far as like Instagram or Twitter, like people like your picture, people like comment on your picture, and that like changes your opinion. And like when you view other people's things, that like you're getting outside influence. And I don't think that he likes the idea of having outside influence. I think he like prefers like having your own opinion and expressing your own opinion. So the very idea that like you can like somebody's thing because like you like what they're doing like goes against that. Like you should do what you like because you rely on yourself and like you have self-reliance with things.
I think he like wouldn't like it because like the amount of time that we spend on our phones like could be spent like doing other things, like going outside, doing like exploring. Like I feel like he would not want us to be so absorbed around social media and like what others are doing and actually do stuff on our own.
But let me play devil's advocate here. So when you're on social media, could you also be spreading your ideas and being a philosopher yourself in your own right?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Like with Twitter, you can say anything you want. Like you don't have to be agreeing with what everyone else says. Like you can retweet something and then go against what they said and explain your case. That's
Yeah.
all I think. That's a big.
Also, I think the social media, like how everyone gets sucked in, also contributes to like the materialistic kind of society we live in. And it says here he was materialism. So I think he would have kind of hated that, how everyone's trying to get like the new iPhone and everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, but if this is a guy who, around his time, the 1800s, was against society, so like, he really didn't like technology. He lived in a cabin in the woods. But like, now in our like our society that relies heavily on technology, I feel like he'd be even more like disgusted. He would hate it even more.
How do you think he would have felt about how politicians and how they talk about the border wall and the government shutdown on social media? Do you think he would think that's effective?
I
I
feel
think
like he would see
use
that.
that as like a way to prove his point that like the government isn't like always fair, and like most of the time they're like unjust, and that like people should be able to like voice their opinion, like rebel against the government, like especially when it's unjust, and like yeah.
I feel like he would just see like the border wall and the government shutdown as a distraction to what like we should really be focused on. Like he thinks that like, and also he thought that everyone was created equal. So the whole idea of building a wall and discriminating a certain amount of people to not like let them in our country is, he would be like completely against that.
Yeah, I agree with Danny, because this is a guy, like I said earlier, was against slavery and against the Mexican War, because he thought it was like unfair towards the people of those races. So yeah, I think he would be really against the border wall.
So let's move a little deeper and move off of this question of social media. I think that there's interesting, perspectives on both sides. I would say one thing that I think is interesting about the point that you made about technology. I mean, it's obviously hard for us to sort of say what kind of phone would he have, right? But I think there's an interesting historical fact that might be illustrative of this a little bit, which is that his family invented the graphite pencil. And he actually worked in his uncle's factory. Like if you think about the technology of the day, the graphite pencil made pencils much more available for people, to use and to write and things. So you think about the technology of the day, the graphite pencil as opposed to social media, there are some parallels there, right? So I think it's hard to say that Thoreau would shun technology or that Thoreau would reject technology. Think about it. He went to the woods to have this experiment, but he wrote the book about living in the woods, right? So he's sharing that idea with everybody else. He wants everybody to know this. But let's go a little deeper into his philosophy, because I think one of the questions that I have is he a hypocrite? Does he really believe in the things that he says? And what does he believe? And I think that's something that we can really get deep into and discuss whether we think his point is correct or not. Like, do men lead lives of quiet desperation? And I think that's a really important question for us to tackle. Do we think that that's true? And if so, what impact does that have? So let's talk about that.
I believe that in most cases, people everywhere are leading lives of desperation because people are trying to follow the normal standards, like getting into a really good college so that they can get into a really good job. But I feel like what Thoreau was trying to say was that if you follow this normal path, you yourself may not be happy, and I feel like he wants people to move away from that and to really do something to make themselves happy in a different way.
Do you think he really did change his life from like the normal, how he said men lead lives of quiet desperation? Like, do you think he led a life of quiet desperation, or do you think he like changed like the normal and how he lived?
I don't think he changed the normal, because like it's not like everyone started.
Well, I mean like
yeah.
for him.
But
himself.
yeah, personally for himself, I think he lived his life doing what he wanted to do. Because I mean, he chose to go off in the woods, and it seems like after doing that, he got a better understanding of what life was supposed to be like. And even from the beginning, when he he was protesting, he didn't have to do that, but he did that on his own choice. So I think that he lived his life the way he thought it should be lived.
Yeah, I agree, Carson. I think one of the most important things he did is when he didn't pay his taxes and he went to jail and made that stand, and he didn't just comply and submit to the Mexican-American War and pay his taxes and kind of just be like everyone else. And I feel like maybe a lot of men lead these lives that they aren't fulfilled in. But I mean, us being here today and talking about how we feel about that shows that we're not, people at this table aren't leading quiet lives, and that we're speaking out. So maybe not everyone, and I feel like there's tools around us so that we can have our voices be heard and maybe change the world in our own way.
I think when Thoreau refers to men lead lives of desperation, I think that sort of refers to the workplace at that time and how it was just so industrial, and you have to do things by this exact way, and if it's not that, it's not how it's supposed to be, and how people are sort of just droning on through their day-to-day life, not questioning anything. And I think that's what he was trying to do, but now the status quo has changed.
I disagree with that, because you are still forced to go to school. The government says you have to go to school, and then also you're not going to get anywhere. The society says you're not going to get anywhere if you don't go to school. If you don't go to school, you're not going to get a good job. And society says that if you don't have a good job, then you're basically not a success. So I think he wants us to break away from that and see different routes. We don't have it's not school then job. There's different routes to get to the end.
But how though? How do you break away from that? I think that's an important question, right? Because this is really the key idea here. If Thoreau is saying that, I think if you look at it, it's easy to look back and say, oh, it was different then, right? But I think Quinn's right. I think Thoreau would today say no, most people just go through their lives and follow the path they think they're supposed to follow. But I guess what I'm asking about the hypocrisy of it is can you do that?
No.
Can you break free of the path that society tells you you're supposed to follow? And I think one of the things that I would argue is that I'm not sure, it's your parents or maybe you have chosen to come to Hun, right? Because they saw that as giving you an advantage somehow, right? So it's in a way, being here is playing the game, not violating the rules of the game. Do you see what I mean? So I guess the question then becomes can you break out of that? Is the only way for you all to break out of that just to drop out of Hun and go live in the woods for a week or 2 years? Is that the only way to do it? And is that what Thoreau is advocating or not? I think that's really interesting. That's what we should get into. So I think this question between Jack and Quinn, I think, is a really important one, which is can we break free of the rules of society? If it's true that those rules push us into this desperation, this life that we don't really want to lead for ourselves, is school pushing us toward that? You all care way more about your grades than you do about what we learn in class, right? You've been trained to do that since you were little. So like, can you break out of that? Is it possible to break out of that? I think that's a really interesting question. And should we? Maybe we shouldn't try to. I think those are important questions. Let's try to tackle that and see what we think.
I feel like you might be talking about, some people are probably the desperation in that quote. He might be saying some people are desperate to like get out of their position, like they don't like their job. Maybe they want to break free from society, but they were like told they couldn't from a young age, like you said. Like it's implanted in their brain that they have to go to school, they have to get a job, start a family. But maybe some people are desperate to get out of that situation, but they just can't because they don't want to, like, they're too afraid of being a failure.
I feel like as much as I want to say that I want do every project and do every assignment with the idea that I want to learn something from it, that sometimes it's because you want to get a good grade. And I think that everyone here could agree about that. But is that something you want to change? Like, I don't know if I would change that. If would I sacrifice, learning everything for maybe a 50 instead of a 90? I just don't know if it's something I could change. But I think that's just I don't know. Can we talk about that?
I kind of agree, because I feel like you can change it, but I think you have to want to. Like, a lot of us are kind of happy with, we get through high school, we go to college, we get a good job, and we're fine with that. But some people might not want that life, but I feel like a lot of us are just okay with that, and we're good with that.
I think one of the biggest factors in kind of going to school and going to college is money, because we live in a materialistic society. So you always want the best, everything or more than everyone else. And I think getting a good job is kind of the start to that, because then you'll have more money. So I think that's kind of what fuels the whole idea of our society, kind of.
Yeah, if you do break out, there's no way you can do something that's as successful as something where you stay on the path, because based on society, there's only certain things you can do to make yourself successful. You can't just go on your own path and then all of a sudden make yourself the richest person ever.
But so what you guys are saying then is that you're balancing out, and I guess Thoreau would argue, happiness versus success. Do you see what I mean? You're saying in order to be successful, I have to play this game. And yeah, I might not be happy. I might end up miserable, but I'm successful, right? Is there validity in that? And I appreciate that you guys are saying no, I would choose the path of success because that's more important to me than happiness. But is that the trade-off?
No, but to live in today's society, people mainly focus on success because that's where you get all the stuff. You don't get everything when you do to become happy. Because like Zach said, it's a materialistic society. People want materials, and you can only get that through success, not happiness.
Wait, but how do you define success? Because for some people, success may be being really happy with everything they have, and other people, Zach was saying it for money. How do you define success?
I think the success that we define as a society is the success of how we do at this game. For example, if you become for example someone as rich as Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, then you obviously have done really well in this game. You are successful. But as someone as Henry David Thoreau, who just sits in the woods and just clears his thoughts, writes a book, and does what he wants to do, then he is successful. So it's all about how you define. It's all about how you define success in your mind.
I feel like success creates happiness. If you are successful, then you're going to live a happier life. Because if you're unsuccessful, it leaves you with a lack of money, and then that creates a lack of other things.
Yeah, but you can be successful, you can be making a lot of money, but just have to go to work every day and not be happy with what you're doing.
Exactly.
You can just be sitting behind a desk and not be happy, but you're still successful.
Go to work.
Think about this. Think about when you first went to school. And when you're in the lower grades in school, it was all kind of exciting, right? It was fun. You liked the stuff that you were doing. Grades didn't matter, right? It was just you got to play and you enjoyed it. But then as you get older, that play goes away and it becomes more and more kind of rote, or more and more you have to do this. It becomes sort of this obligation. And there's a quote from Thoreau that I think captures that really well. Look at his first page under economy. And it's right in the middle of the paragraph. And he says, "Age is no better, hardly so well, qualified for an instructor as youth, for it has not profited so much as it has lost." What does he mean when he says that?
have we gotten better with age? Like, have we learned more, or have we forgotten how to play and kind of?
Exactly. He's kind of saying there that as you get older, you lose that sense of wonder and like excitement and happiness because you're sort of forced down this path that you didn't choose for yourself, that somebody else chose for you, right? So I think that's an important quote to think about. Like, what is his real philosophy there? What would he say about that? And so I think it's interesting when you think about, like, what do you give up in order to meet society's standard of success? Like, that is a question that I think, like, I wonder how Thoreau would answer it. Did he live by his own words?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he
Seems like
did.
I think in his later life, like,
What do you mean?
because as you mentioned earlier, he used to work in like the factory,
Mhm.
which is pretty much exactly like living a life of quiet desperation. Like, you get a job, you work 9 to 5 or whatever the hours were, and like you go home. And I mean, it's like alright, it's not a bad life, but like later, when he moved to the woods, that was obviously not like according to like the social kind of like rules, I guess. And yeah, I think he changed later in his life after he realized like he didn't.
I mean, I think you're right. At the end of his life, right? I mean, and you can argue he only lived he was a young man when he died, right? So when you think about like what he says at the end of Walden, when he says, "I learned this by my experiment," like what did he say that he learned? Like, what's his message after his experience?
I mean, like, I think he's trying to say, like, don't, like, break away. Don't, like, do what makes you happy. Because, like, when he was teaching in the school and, like, when you said, like, he had to hit the kid with the ruler, he didn't like that, so he broke away from it and he changed his ways. Like, he didn't go with what society told him to do. He did what made him happy and what he thought was right.
I also feel like it might be that he realized that we don't need all of these things, like the money or the success that everyone wants. And that while living in the woods, he realized this, that people, all they really need to do to be happy is just lead simple lives.
I can't really tell if he was happy though. Like, was he
Yeah,
happy there?
Exactly.
He's talking about how that you have to not cut yourself off, but do what you want to do to make you happy. But was he actually happy alone in this cabin when he was in love with this woman who didn't love him back, and then his brother died, right, of lockjaw? But was that actually the life that he lived, or was he just sitting quiet in desperation in his cabin? I don't know.
Well, it's like, I feel like it's hard to judge, like, how he, like, would view, like, because he wanted us to, like, follow, like, what we truly believed, and, like, it'd be hard to, like, judge, like, how he would, like, think of some people, because maybe some people would like to have a successful life, even though if it leads to them, like, having a miserable life.
Well, that's what they're taught. See, I feel like as a kid, we're taught to believe that you do well in school, you get a good job, you make a lot of money, and then you live a happy life. But we don't realize that we're taught that money brings happiness, or money buys happiness. But really, I feel like once a lot of people get to that stage, they realize that actually, while they're spending all this time working, they're not really having fun. And that all this money, even though they have all this money, like they can buy anything they want, but you can't buy happiness.
I feel
This
like
is like
That's
the
what
same.
he's trying to say, essentially, that we're taught that money buys happiness, but that's not really what's true.
I feel like this is still connected to, like, at the age and, like, how, like, once you age older, like, you see more of the world. So I feel like we're, like, not at that point that where he finally realized that, because he finally realized that, like, after he went to Harvard, realizing that, like, he just wish he would have seen the world in a different way. We're still, like, at that point where, like, we're still in, like, high school, and we're still, like, being influenced, like, heavily influenced by, like, a lot of other adults.
I disagree. As I get older, I don't think I see more. I think I see less, and I think I kind of have tunnel vision based on what I think is more important. You know what I mean? Like, when I was little, I feel like I was outside and I was looking at more things, and I was looking at my friends, but sometimes I notice that when I talk to people, I don't look at them in the face because I have my phone or something in my hand. So as I get older, I don't know if I'm noticing more. Maybe I've been more places, but have I actually seen and observed more? And I feel
like when you get older, you're more focused on, like, the end result. Like, you want to get there. Like,
Yeah.
when you're younger, like, there's other things going around in your life. As you get older, you're like, oh, I have to get to this point in my life. I have to do this.
But when you're older, you understand more. Like, you know what you're going for. You know what you're doing. When you're younger, you can see as much as you want, but you won't actually understand the meaning of it.
But, like, are you happy just going for that end result, just to get there, and you just be
I like to know
there?
what I'm doing.
I sort of feel like if we're taught what is happiness when we're younger, then we already have this like altered like thing in our mind of what is happiness. So to just say go do what makes you happy, that's not something that you generally have thought of. That's what you've been taught. So when you guys say like Thoreau thinks we should just go do what makes us happy, we don't know what really makes us happy. If all our life our parents taught us money makes happiness, we don't know what truly makes us happy until we like experience that. And I think that's what he's kind of saying, like we should experience it, like not just like say that's what makes me happy, I'm gonna go do that, because you don't really know, because that's what we've been taught. What do you think of that, Hannah?
Are you serious? No, I agree. I think that we are taught like that money makes you happy, and that it's hard to get out of that cycle and think differently if you're taught that your entire life.
So did Thoreau break out of that cycle?
I think he tried to when he
yeah.
went to go to the cabin and sort of rid himself of all his material things. And I think that's what made him happy, sort of releasing himself from society and how he thought that people were sort of interconnected and couldn't really escape. That was his way to escape, but I don't know if that's everyone's way to escape. Certainly by like giving up a few things, you could try to rid yourself of material possessions, which could make you happy, or it could not, but I think it just depends on the person.
Yeah, I agree with Gabby. Like, he did break away, but it's like, people are saying that he didn't realize that he wasn't happy, but I feel like we all realize that we aren't happy in this society, but we kind of like put it aside and we don't act on it because we've invested so much into this. And if we break away from it, we're throwing away everything that we've done and all the experiences that we've had. Because like, it's harder for us to break away like now. These people have invested in us and we've invested in ourselves. Like parents have thrown a bunch of money, which they have worked for themselves, into schooling, and it's harder for us because like personally, if I tried to break away, I'd feel guilty because my parents have thrown so much of their lives into myself, and I feel like I'm throwing that away.
Exactly, because like if we were to break away, we would have to like not care about our grade, which could get us ultimately maybe even kicked out of the school, and we would just go on a path that maybe we think is best for us, but it will cause destruction to so many other people besides us.
But what did Thoreau say though, that, like, I think that one of the things I think is interesting, I think it's a really good argument that you're making, is like, we're trapped, is what you're saying. Like, there is no way out, because if you break free, you let down other people too, right? And like, the consequences of breaking free are so great that we can't do it, like we're stuck. And that's why he's saying the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Like, he knows that most people can't break out of that. But isn't he advocating changing the rules? Like, in other words, what I'm saying is, like, wouldn't he argue, like, why do we have to have grades? Like, why do we have to have school that has grades? Like, if you change the system, like, it doesn't mean you wouldn't go to school anymore. It just means that, like, the process of school wouldn't be the same. Do you understand what I mean? So it's sort of, like, I wonder about, like, the difference between, like, let's stay within the rules of the game and just not play, as opposed to let's change the rules of the game. Do you see what I mean?
How do you change the rules when everybody and everything that you've ever learned and everything in society, like the people who make the most money got the best grades, went to the best colleges, how do you change the rules when we see the rules work?
That's a good question, and answer that question. Like, what would Thoreau say about
I mean,
it?
I don't think
That's,
you
like, not
change
always
the
true,
rules,
yeah.
because like if you change the rules, like there's no limits to things. Like certain things have rules for a reason. Like rules are there for like so that you won't go like and do whatever you want. Like I know Thoreau's saying you should go do whatever you want, but like that's not always the good thing, because like it could like hurt someone else like you're not intending to.
Sahil likes the game.
Rules aren't
Right?
Sahil, are rules made to be broken though?
Well,
I mean, you could break them. Like I'm not saying I don't want to break them. Like I don't like.
You don't want to break any rules?
So
No,
Sahil,
I do want to break rules.
I think
Like,
Sahil's,
don't like
I think
that.
it's important to value. I think it's important to value that idea, though, right? Because what Sahil's basically arguing is like, desperation be damned. Like, I like the game, right? Like, I might end up unhappy, but I want to keep playing the game because I like the structure of it. I like the path that it gives me, right? And that's a fairly valid. I mean, there were people that thought Thoreau was nuts. Like, this guy's crazy. Like, he's going and living in the woods by himself for 2 years. Like, how is that like helping society, right? So there were people that had that same sort of skepticism about the impact that his ideas were having. And I guess the question that I would jump off that with is, did he make a difference?
not really.
like nobody really knew. Like I said in the article, like nobody really knew when he died. Like I don't think that many people like.
We're talking
Think about
about
the
it now,
impact
though.
now,
Like,
Like later it happened.
Like, yeah, we're at Hun, we're playing the game. I'm the first to
People
admit.
didn't really know.
But like,
in that
I don't
time.
really feel bad about playing the game, and at least we're sitting here and we're aware of what we're doing. I think that's important, and that we're talking about him today. Like,
But don't you think it's worse that we know what we're doing
Yeah.
and we're not changing anything about it?
That's
That's a
terrible.
really good question. Because in some ways it might be better not to know
Yeah.
that you're unhappy,
Yeah.
True.
right? Like, he's telling you that, like, your life is bad because you're just playing this game
And you're okay with it.
and,
like,
and you're okay with it because you don't know there's an alternative,
yeah.
right? Until maybe it's too late, like you're older and you're just sort of like, gee, I really am not happy. Like, I don't like what I'm doing. I don't like sitting at this desk every day. I don't like my job, right? Like, does it get to the point where it's too late to challenge that status quo? And so I think Hannah makes a really good point, which is like, is it maybe better not to know what Thoreau is telling us than to know? Do you see what I mean? Like, because once you realize, I mean, he makes a good argument, I think. Do you agree? Like, do you think he makes a fairly good case for what he's saying? You know, and like, I guess the question is it better that we know or that we don't know about it?
I feel like it depends when you like, figure it out. Like if you figure it out when you're 60, it's already too late. But like, if you know now,
But if
we
you
can
are
still
60
change our ways.
and you have kids, you could teach them.
Yeah, you could
Like,
still-
I think it's better for everybody to know.
Are you gonna
Teach
change your
grandkids.
ways now that like you read this? Like honestly, like are you gonna not go to college
No.
and get a job and like?
He's not telling you not to go to college.
Well, no, I mean,
Yeah.
but like, are you gonna like change like? Are you gonna really try to follow what he's saying, or are you gonna still play the game? Like,
Yeah, like, you may still be talking about him, but I don't think he's impacting society. I mean, because a large amount of the population is still gonna go to school, well, 100% of the population. It's still gonna, 99%, it's still gonna go to school. It's still gonna go to school, and then a lot of those people are still gonna go to college and then try to be successful. And then I bet you like 70% of the people are going to be unhappy when they're working, so, I mean, I think he had like, it's a lack of impact, but I guess.
But let's be clear about one thing. I don't want anybody to walk away thinking that Thoreau didn't value education. Like, he was a teacher, right? Like, he taught school. Like, he quit his job as a teacher because they made him hit students. But then he started his own school with his brother. So he believed in education. He just wanted to teach you truth. He wanted you to ask questions. Like, that's what he wanted you to do. I don't think we should walk away from this discussion thinking it's Thoreau's way or the system. Right? It's not like you have to pick Sahil's way or Thoreau's way, right? Like, that's not required. Like, I think what he's trying to say is like, wake up and ask the question. Like, wake up and ask yourself the question. And it's no coincidence that he ends Walden with that. He says, only that day dawns to which we are awake. Like, wake up is what he's saying. He's asking you to like consider this question. You might not agree, you might not come to the same answer as everyone else. You might not decide to go live in the woods. But at least if you ask that question of yourself, like, what makes me happy? What contribution do I make to the world by sitting behind that desk, as opposed to doing something I love to do, right? Like, I think that's what he is trying to get people to understand. So is there a lesson in it? Like, for us, even if we decide that we want to keep playing the game because our parents are relying on us to play that game, or because it's going to lead us to something that we need in order to, like, be valued, I think at the very least, like, the idea of asking that question of yourself, like, is worth it to him. Like, that's what he's arguing. He's not telling everyone to go live in the woods. He did it for us. Like, that's why he writes the book and shares it. He doesn't expect everyone to follow that experiment. But at the same time, like, he definitely is saying to us, you know, wake up, and no matter how mean your life is, meet it and live it. He says that very directly. So I do think that it's important that, you know, we walk away from this conversation, regardless of whether we think Thoreau was right or not, or whether he ultimately had an impact or not. I think the key question is that impact comes from the question that hopefully people ask themselves. And I think that's a key moment, that's a key idea. Does everyone understand? So, good job. I think you got a lot out of Thoreau. I think you got a lot out of what he's trying to say. And I hope you will think about it, because in the context of this time period in American history, his voice does make a difference in people asking questions about slavery, about women's rights, about, mental health, for people that are mentally ill, for education reform, so that voice, even though it's a tiny little voice, it's a tiny pebble dropped in a big pond, there's definitely a ripple that is created by Thoreau and his ideas, by Emerson and his ideas, by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her ideas, by these people that changed American attitudes at a really crucial moment that's going to lead up to the outbreak of the Civil War. So does everyone sort of follow that idea, like where it fits? So I do think it's interesting, though, that the most of you have probably never heard of Thoreau before we talked about this in this class. And so I hope that you can at least walk away with an appreciation of like what he was saying. Sahil doesn't like him, but I hope otherwise that we'll walk away with an appreciation. So good job. Thanks, everybody. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing over the next couple of days, because I think it's important before we go to Gettysburg on Saturday. And I'm going to send you this afternoon the itinerary for the Gettysburg trip, so you can see all the things we're going to do and what we're leaving and when we're coming back, all the places we're going to go. But we also have to prepare for Gettysburg, because one of the things you'll be doing there is making a film about some aspect of the Gettysburg battle that you choose. So you're going to be making like a documentary film about the battle, and I'll share some examples with you in our next class. But you're going to want to be thinking about like what you might want to choose as your film topic. You will be able to work in teams, so you'll choose a topic that's sort of a documentary. The project is called 5 Minutes at War, so it's basically a 5-minute film where you're going to sort of overview some aspect of the battle. Those of you that aren't going on the trip, I'll have an alternative assignment for you that you'll be able to work on. So, Carson, are you all ready for that alternative assignment?
Yeah, the research.
You can do it at Yale when you're up at Yale on your trip. So let me give you your test back. I did grade your tests, and I'll give it back. 2 people didn't write their names on their tests, so I guess those people don't get their test back. So May.
Oh, that was definitely me that did it.
Oh, shoot.
Really?
I think I
Yeah, probably.
You J. Cole song.
Oh, we have to grade
What?
Yeah, middle child.
Like,
9.
it's the day after we did that
Already ready
presentation.
for this.
You already know he's gonna ask. Thanks.
Oh, my name was on it. They saved with the bag. Oh, no.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Nice pose.
Thank you.
We were supposed to pose.
Yep. So, which one's which? All right, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about this test really quickly. So first question. Yeah, you can. First question. Do you go back to the first question for me? So the first question, I asked you to think about it at the conference. If there was one person that was the first person invited, which was James K. Pullman, then who would the second person be, and who would the last person be? And I told you there wasn't a right or wrong answer to that, but you had to show the critical thinking by sort of explaining your choice. So who might arguably be second? You want somebody that had a big impact, somebody that covered maybe more than one category of topic, somebody that really was like an exemplary figure of their time. The most popular choice that was really well argued was Frederick Douglass. I think that's a pretty solid choice. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the second most popular choice. I think both of those are arguably very important. Last, you wanted to pick somebody that maybe had little impact, like little effect on things. People chose people like Lucretia Mott, Dorothea Dix, and I think the best choice, Abraham Lincoln, ironically. I put him in this group because I knew people would want to choose him right away because, oh, he's so important to American history, and he is, but not as of 1850, right? His impact comes much later. So probably your last choice. So really it was based on how well you argued your choice, all right? Second question was only one of these individuals gets to be on the new $20 bill. Who gets it? Most of you chose either Sojourner Truth or Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Elizabeth Cady Stanton because of her role as a leader in the women's rights movement, Seneca Falls Convention, the Declaration of Sentiments, all these important things that she did. Some of you made a really interesting point, though, about Sojourner Truth. What was that interesting point about Sojourner Truth?
She paid $20 for her.
She paid $20 for her own freedom. So I think that's kind of appropriate that she would be the choice. But basically, if you argued why and you gave me facts about them, you got the points on that. The third question, I wanted you to tell me how these quotes showed the changing impact in America, and they connect to each other. Like one leads to another. So Emerson is saying, be self-reliant. Don't rely on what society tells you to do. Frederick Douglass is saying, Like, I'm gonna be true to myself. Like, do you see how one affects the other? So do you see how Emerson's quote affects Douglas's idea? And then what does Douglas then impact? The most important quote there is William Lloyd Garrison when he says, right and wrong can't be argued. If something is wrong, you can't compromise over it. So you could argue that quote is like predictive of the Civil War. If slavery is immoral, no more compromise about slavery. Right? So you should have shown how the impact built over those three. And then finally, who would John Brown most admire at the conference? Pretty easy, Nat Turner. Nat Turner, who led a rebellion of slaves. What did John Brown advocate? Violence against slavery. What did Nat Turner do? Led a slave rebellion, violent slave rebellion. Who would he hate the most? Also easy. Who had the biggest impact on slavery in America that was at that conference? Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney's cotton gin made so many more slaves required that it really exacerbated the problem over slavery. Okay? So the total for this was 20. So in very Thoreau-like style, let's not worry too much about the grade, right? There's plenty of grades to come. You get bonus points for going on the trip, and you also will end up with some points for a film Friday. This Friday, I'm going to do a film Friday, the movie Glory. It's posters right there. It's a great film about the Civil War. It'll be a good preview for our trip to Gettysburg. So that'll be Friday, 6 to 8, and I'll post that on right now.
Do you get plus points for that, or is that just graded?
No, they're getting a grade for their Gettysburg project, just like you'll get a grade for your research project.
Oh my god.
So that's the way it goes. All right, guys, great job. Thank you, everybody. Good job in the Harkness. Have a good day.
I literally what? No, I really thought so. No. That's pretty cool.
Why is it?
Why is it?
Plus points.